You are finally going to learn how to use Photoshop. In this one video, I'm going to teach you all the tips, all the tricks, and some one-click magic to creating stunning images. Let's get started. First, let's create our canvas. I usually work with 1920 by 1080 since I mostly use Photoshop for creating YouTube thumbnails. Then I'll just drag and drop my image directly into my canvas. I can move around my canvas by holding the spacebar, clicking and dragging. To zoom in and out, I can just hit Z to bring up my zoom tool and just click where I want to zoom in. And to zoom out, I'll hold Alt and click, or Option if you're on a Mac. I am using the latest version of Photoshop, so make sure you are up to date. The first thing I want to do is separate my subject from the background. I can do this by choosing any of the selection tools. In this case, I'll choose the lasso tool, then I'll hit Select and Mask, and then Select Subject. Once that processes, we can see it's done an amazing job of isolating our subject. By increasing the transparency to 100, we can really see how well it's done. There are two refine modes here, color aware and object aware. Toggle between these to see what is working best for your photo. I'll select the Refine Edge brush and comb over the hair. This is going to pull out even more detail and preserve some single strands of hair. Really amazing. I'll go over any areas where the background is peeking through or areas where the hair is not showing. There are a lot of tools here on the right. I'll use Shift Edge to try and remove a little of this dark edge line here. The edges can use a little bit of work. In the output setting, I can toggle Decontaminate Colors. This does a great job, but maybe a little too much, so I could just decrease the amount with the slider until it looks exactly how I want it. For the Output To setting, I always leave this as is and then hit OK. Down at the right, we can see our layers in Photoshop. Any image or effect I'm going to add is going to be a layer. After hitting Z for zoom, I can select Fit to Screen at the top here. And this is just going to give me a full view of our canvas. I know I'll eventually want a background, so I'm just going to add a placeholder background for now. I never suggest editing with a white background. I'll go to Layer, New, and select a layer, and I'll call this Gradient. Then I can find my Gradient tool in the toolbar. At the top, I can find some gradient presets. I'll use this dark blue and click and then drag it out. Then I can change it to a radial gradient and click reverse. We want our subject on top, so I'll drag the gradient layer beneath our subject. I'm going to move my subject to the left side of the screen, so I'm going to hit V to bring up my selection tool. Then I can select my subject layer and just drag it to the left of screen. I'll start adding some effects layers. For this, I use FootageCrate.com. It's primarily a video visual effects resource, but you can download images from it. I'll search for embers to find the one I want. Now, of course, these are video files, but I have this icon here that's going to let me copy the image to my clipboard. You do need a ProductionCrate account to use this tool, but there are tons of stock photo options out there. I just really like the convenience of using FootageCrate. Once the image is copied to my clipboard, I can open up Photoshop and make sure no layer is selected by clicking in this empty area, and then I can hit Ctrl V to paste in my embers image. By selecting an edge, I can just scale down my embers and then drag them where I want them to be on the canvas. You might have noticed these nasty little dark edges in the embers here. This is a weird Photoshop quirk that seems to happen when pasting images with transparency from the clipboard. To remove the dark edge, I can just go to Layer, Matting, Remove Black Matte, and now our embers look nice and spicy. So anytime I'm pasting images from FootageCrate.com, I also have to remove the black matting. And by the way, if you're a Photoshop expert watching this video, please let me know if there's any other way to avoid having to remove the black matting every single time. That's gonna really help me out. I'll move the ember elements around to a place where they look nice. All right, let's add more effects from FootageCrate.com. I'll search for dirt and use some of these dirt blasts. VFX elements are nice because most of these images have an alpha channel, or essentially transparency. These effects are made for compositing, so they are perfect for this kind of work. Here's a nice dirt blast effect. I'll just copy the image to my clipboard with this button, paste it into Photoshop, scale and position the dirt blast where I want it, and then again go to Layer, Matting, and Remove Black Matte. I'll add a ton of effects later, but I want to show you some essential Photoshop techniques first. I want to go over some stuff that I wish I knew earlier when I started Photoshop, namely working non-destructively, meaning we never lose information as we are working in Photoshop, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. If you look at our subject layer, you'll see this black and white matte. This is called a layer mask. It tells Photoshop what we want visible and what we want hidden. The white elements are what are visible and the black elements are hidden. You can add layer masks by clicking this rectangle with a hole in it down here. This is better than using the eraser tool directly on an image because it is non-destructive. We can always just delete the layer mask at any point in time. If you've erased something directly, it's going to be much harder to undo. I can also paint directly onto my layer mask. By hitting B, I'll select my paintbrush tool. With my subject layers mask selected, I'll paint on some white just to demonstrate. If you look over here, you will see I have black as my primary color and white as my secondary color. A quick trick to flip these around is to hit X. Now I have white selected. Now that I have white selected, I could just paint onto my canvas. You can see my layer mask is white wherever my subject is, but also where my brush is painting. So I am revealing the original background. Okay, that was just to demonstrate how layer masks work. I'll hit Ctrl Z to undo it. I'm going to add a fire effect over to the left side of the screen. I'll add that later, but for now, I'm going to add a warm glow onto my subject where the fire would be lighting up my subject. There are a bunch of ways to do this. I'll select this icon that looks like a half and half cookie and select photo filter. From here, I could just increase the density. We can see that a ton of orange is being added, but it's being added everywhere. I don't want the orange on the background, I only want it on my subject, on the person. To do this, I'll make sure that my photo filter layer is directly above my subject layer. Then I can hold Alt right in between these layers. And when this drop-down arrow and box appear, I'll just click. This creates what is called a clipping mask. This is one of the most useful tools in Photoshop. This makes it so that my photo filter layer is only visible where my subject is visible. I don't want my subject layer to be entirely orange. That makes me look like the guy from Sin City. I want the orange to be just painted onto areas that would be lit up by the fire. I'll do this with a layer mask. With my photo filter layer selected, I'll select that half and half icon for the layer mask. Instead of painting off the warm tones, I want to paint them on. I can do this by inverting the layer mask by selecting it and hitting Ctrl I. Then I can hit B to select my paintbrush tool, making sure I have white as my primary color. From here, I'll just paint onto areas where I want the warm glow of the fire to be lighting up. Because this is a non-destructive technique, I can always come back and paint or remove from the layer mask in the future. Now that I have these warm tones isolated to where I want them, I can tweak the photo filter colors a little bit and continue to paint. Right now, the photo filter is being universally applied to both the bright and dark areas of my subject. If I want the warm orange glow to only light up the brighter areas, I can come down to this icon that says Effects. We have a ton of useful tools here, but I'll focus on the blending options. By moving these arrows under the underlying layer, I'm telling the photo filter to only be visible based on certain levels of brightness or value. We can see that the edges of the orange look a bit crunchy and not smooth. This is an easy fix. We can smoothen the transition by holding Alt and separating these arrows. The further apart they are, the smoother the transition is gonna be. Pay attention to the shirt so you can see exactly what's going on. I'll add some more of VFX elements using all of the same techniques I've already covered, and I'm also making sure to double click and rename my layers as this project becomes more and more complex. The more layers you have, the harder it's going to be to navigate. With my embers selected, I'll select where it says normal and try a few other blending modes. I can see what they're going to look like by just hovering over each one. Blending modes change the color of an image based on the layers underneath it. For the embers, I'll leave these on the lighten blend mode. Let's add that fire element that we already have the orange glow from. I'm also going to add some debris elements. You can see some of the debris is covering up my face, so I could just paint that out using a layer mask, which you already know how to do because hopefully you've been paying attention. I'm gonna find a background from pexels.com. It is a great resource for finding photos. Here's a nice photo from Gabriela Palai. I'll drag and drop this into Photoshop, but I have to remove this blue Smurfy dude. Thankfully, this is super easy to do. With any selection tool, I have this Select Subject button. By clicking it, I get these selection lines around my Smurf. Then I can go to Select, Modify, Expand, and expand out, making sure we are capturing every single pixel of our subject. Then I could just hit the Generative Fill, leave the text form blank, and hit Generate. This makes a new layer called Generative Fill, which just covers up my subject. I'll select that layer, hold Shift, and select the background layer, and then I right-click and select Merge Layers. This just simplifies it down so I only have one background layer. I'll rename it Background and drop it to the bottom of my layer stack. From here, I'll scale and position it where it looks good. You can use the horizon line to try and match it to the perspective of your subject photo. Horizon lines are basically the camera or eye lines. The placement of the camera that shot my subject was pretty low, probably right above the waist, so that's where I'm going to place my horizon line of my background. There are a bunch of compositing tutorials out there covering horizon lines and vanishing points. I suggest watching a few of those if you don't know what I'm talking about. Next, I want to match the color of my subject to my background. There's a bunch of ways of doing this, but I'll show you the easiest technique. I'll just select my subject layer and then go to Filter, Neural Filters, and come down to Harmonization. Download it if you haven't downloaded it already, and then enable it with this button. Where it says Select Layer, I'll just select the background layer. Once that processes, I can adjust the strength by increasing it or decreasing it. Before harmonization, the tones are really warm and red, and after, they are this nice cool blue, and pretty closely match our background. From here, I'll just hit OK. Anytime you see these selection lines and you want to get rid of them, just hit Ctrl D. I want some depth of field blur in my background image, so with my background selected, I'll go to Filter, Neural Filters, and under Photography, I'll use the Depth Blur Filter. Again, you have to download it if you haven't already, and then enable it. I'll decrease the focal distance so it looks like the focus is pretty close to camera, basically where my subject would be standing. I can also play with the blur strength until it looks realistic and then hit OK. I'll select my fire element and change the blending mode. By scrolling over the options, I can see what looks the best. In this case, I actually like linear light. I want some more warm tones in my scene from this fire source. To do this, I'm going to create a new layer and I'm going to call it Fire Glow. I'll hit B to bring up my brush tool. Then by clicking this color box in the toolbar, I can use the color picker and choose a warm tone from my fire effect, and then just hit OK. Then by using my right bracket key, I can increase the size of my brush and just paint on a soft orange blob. I can use the overlay blending mode with that layer. I'll paint in a bit more orange near the fire so it's extra orangey. I want way more VFX elements to really give it that poster look. I'll speed through this process since I've already covered all these steps before. And here's what I've got. I've added a ton of VFX. Okay, so at this stage, I'm going to save the project here, and then I'm going to save a new version so I always have that original I can go back to. I'll select the top layer holding Shift and then select the bottom layer. Then I can hit Ctrl G to group these into a folder. Then with that group folder selected, I can duplicate it with Ctrl J. I'll leave the bottom group untouched so I can always go back to it if I want to. I try to be as non-destructive as possible. For this top group, I'm going to right click on it and select Merge Group. And then I'll just select the crop tool. Actually, I'll show you why I'm doing this though. If I go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, you can see all of this erroneous junk. If I hit Cancel and then select the crop tool, or just use the shortcut C and then hit Enter and Enter again, then if I go back to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, I can start with these final touches. These final steps are really where the overall look and grade of the image come together. I tweak a lot of these settings: vibrance, temperature, grains, vignettes, S-curves, and color grades. There are no rules here, but one note is that it is extremely easy to go over the top with it. Find some settings you like, then go out for a nice pleasant walk, and then come back and see if they look any good. Here's what I came up with. I like it. I can't decide if it looks like a 300 poster or the cover of some bad romance novel. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more Photoshop tutorials, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks everybody. Remember to make it awesome.